Hello everyone, how have you been? It's been a long while. Welcome to another episode of Understanding Bach's Fugue. This is Marco, and today we are going to analyze the fugue from the Prelude and Fugue number 12 in F minor, BWV 857 from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1. The preludes and fugue from the Well-Tempered Clavier are usually opposite in character. The prelude being cautious, a bit solemn, while the fugue is energetic, more fun and complex. This piece, however, is the other way around. This particular fugue in four voices introduces a more complex and dynamic character. It enhances the piece's depth through its interwoven lines with the counter subjects, which you'll witness later on, and all throughout the fugue, it attempts to break free from its oppressive atmosphere, but to no avail. None of the diversions are enough to really let the sun break through. Nonetheless, it's a very interesting fugue, and I'm excited to talk to you about it more later. In this fugue, Bach created deep sorrow in which there is no escape. Before we begin, if you find this kind of videos helpful for you, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to this channel. As I always say, a small appreciation like this will keep us moving forward as we keep on making classical music resources available for everyone. Let's now discuss about the fugue. The subject of this fugue enters the tenor. The subject or the theme of this fugue is so easy to recognize as they are a series of quarter notes with half notes towards the end. Also, this piece is mostly 8th and 16th notes, so the quarter notes are easily noticed and heard. Going back to the fugue, the answer, which is tonal, appears in the alto and the counter subject below it in the tenor. This particular counter subject will accompany all the next entries later except in measures 40 to 43. The counter subject shows 16th notes that are ascending in sequence, which you can see at measure 5 to measure 6. Now, before we move forward, take note of this rhythmic pattern of 1 8th note and 2 16th notes. We'll be seeing them again later. Moving forward, the subject enters the bass in measure 7 and the counter subject in the alto. Here is also the first appearance of the second counter subject in the tenor. It begins with 2 downward whole steps and a jump to the 5th. Now let's take a closer look at the second counter subject. I will put rectangles on the first counter subject where there are 16th notes that are ascending in sequence as mentioned earlier. The second counter subject goes against the direction of the first counter subject and returns back close to its position towards the end. Back to the full score, there is a codetta that starts from measure 10 to 13, which is derived from the rhythmic pattern we pointed out earlier. It's interesting to note that the lower voice imitates the higher voices in unison. After the codetta, we see the entrance of the theme in the treble. It's assigned to play the subject instead of the answer. Of course, we get to see both counter subjects below it. Now, this marks the end of our exposition. Now, the first episode of this piece spans from measure 16 to 19, where it modulates from F minor to C minor. In this episode, we can again see the rhythmic pattern that begins the first counter subject. In measure 19, the subject enters in the tenor with the first counter subject starting in the alto and transferring to the treble. As the first counter subject transferred to the treble, the counter subject 2 enters the alto. After a single entry, we head straight to the second episode from measures 22 to 27, where it modulates from C minor to F minor sequentially. We get to see the rhythmic patterns again as they are similar to the first episode but with the inversion of the 2 upper parts. By measure 27, we see the entrance of the subject in the bass with the counter subject 1 in tenor and counter subject 2 in the treble. As we end this entry in F minor, we can consider the recent two entries as the counter-exposition of this piece, though they are separated by an episode. In the third episode, which spans from measures 30 to 34, we modulate from F minor to A flat major, putting squares again on the rhythmic pattern that we keep on seeing throughout the piece. In this episode, we get to see a new counterpoint in the soprano. Take note of this as we listen to the whole piece later on. The subject enters again at measure 34 with the counter subject 1 above it. In measure 35, we see a fragment of the second counter subject in the tenor. The fourth episode begins at measure 37, where we modulate to E flat major. If we take a look at these rectangles, we get to see the last part of counter subject 1 approach sequentially. Let me show it to you for a quick recall. In measure 40, we see a real answer in tenor and both counter subjects are not present. The fifth episode of this piece begins at measure 43 where we modulate from E flat major to C minor. This gives us a more elaborate sequential treatment of the codetta with the addition of a fourth voice. Going forward to measure 47, we see the subject in the treble, fragment of the counter subject 2 in the tenor, and the counter subject 1 in the alto. Like the usual entrances, this is again followed by an episode where we modulate from C minor to the F minor, which brings us back to the home key. We are now in this piece's recapitulation section. In measure 53, there is a subject in the bass with the counter subject 1 in the treble. The counter subject 2, however, is absent. After it comes the coda until the piece ends in a Picardy third. Among all the pieces that I've analyzed, this is one of the most fun, but nonetheless I gotta say that it's also one of the hardest. Despite the entrances being easy to notice, as they're mostly quarter notes, the difference in movement of the two counter subjects are hard to notice and mark, so I apologize if it's a bit messy. Without further ado, let's now listen to the fugue with the marks we put. If you reached this part, thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a lot for today, and I look forward to see you again on the next video.